third one up.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Until we get a quorum, we cannot open the meeting officially, but there are a couple items that I thought we'd do is move the financial reports and the program reports. Do we need a voice vote to move those to the end? Okay. Okay, so we'll just move those to the end of our meeting, to the beginning of our meeting, and then we'll have a quorum here in the next few minutes. So, Jason, if you want to get into our financial reports, and I don't know, I guess Christie was going to make some comments also. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we could sure begin with,
We do vote on receiving the financial reports, we maybe should save that and just do the program reports? Or do we vote on?
we could receive the information from the financials and the program reports, and then once we have quorum, vote to actually receive them officially.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So yeah, we have Christy Jamison here with us today to.
Hello.
Hello.
Christy Jamison, and I'm one of the assistant controllers here at the city accounting services division. And today I'm going to give you just a brief summary of the audited financial reports for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2021. Our external auditors are Allen Gibbs and Hulick, and they issued an unmodified opinion, which is a clean audit. The financial statements comply with all relevant pronouncements that have been issued by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and there were no findings in the audit. Currently, the single audit is still in process for fiscal year 2021, and typically the single audit occurs at the same time as the financial audit, but this year there were some delays in the federal government providing guidance on the COVID-19 funding, and so the auditors were delayed in getting started on the audit. And just as a reminder, single audit is required for any non-federal entity that spends more than $750,000 in a fiscal year of federal funding. And so it is a separate report that is issued for the city and its trusts, and there is a federal or an independent auditor's report that is contained in that report as well. And currently we're anticipating that the report will actually be issued prior to March. Next, just to go through a few highlights of the report, net position. The authority's net position for fiscal year 2021 increased $583,000 to $99.3 million. Net capital assets increased $6.7 million, or approximately a little over 7%. And this was primarily due to the completion of the convention center parking garage. And that was offset by normal depreciation of assets of roughly $5.7 million. Next is debt. Bonds payable decreased $410,000 due to regularly scheduled debt service payments. And the bond ratings as of June 30, 2021 remained the same as the prior year, which were AA2 for Moody's and AA+ for Standard & Poor's, and this is representative of high quality, low credit risk, so these are excellent ratings. Revenues and expenses. Operating revenues decreased $1.4 million for the year for a total of $8.1 million. And primarily this was due to the impact of COVID-19. We continued to see decreased ridership and decreased parking revenues associated with events. And we did have some offset with transportation revenues from the City of Norman interlocal agreement. Operating expenses increased $984,000. We saw an increase in personal services with addition of some new bus drivers, normal wage increases, and overtime associated with coverage of the sick and quarantine employees. Maintenance expense actually decreased for the year, and this was related to maintenance service agreements in the parking operations. And materials and supplies also increased. We saw spending on repair parts and supplies, some new bus shelters, addition of wireless devices and equipment for transportation operations, as well as signage for parking garages. Net non-operating revenues increased 1.9 million, and this was primarily due to an increase in grant revenues, of which a portion of that was the COVID-19 funding, CARES Act funding, and this was offset by a decrease in the city's general fund subsidy. Next is COPTA retirement. Net position restricted for pension benefits increased 3.8 million to 17.9 million for the fiscal year. And as of the July 1st, 2020 actuarial valuation, the funded ratio was 92.27%. And that is an increase over the prior year, which was 75.77%. And that increase is primarily due to market increases on the investments. If you're interested in any additional details, I would like to refer you to the management discussion and analysis. Starts on page 5 of the audited financial report, and it provides a little bit more detailed comparison of this year's activities compared to the prior year. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, that retirement funding level, that's as high as it's been, and I can't ever remember.
It's been several years since it's been that high.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know that it's ever been that high. So, just as a reminder, the board had set, essentially a target several years ago just to get to 80%, right? Because 80% we consider to be kind of hitting the healthy mark of a pension. So, the pension committee and I believe, the trust and the ATU working together to really increase that pension funding ratio is paying off. And granted, like Ms. Jameson said, the investment returns were really the real headline this year that put us up there. But the advantage to that is because our funding ratio is so much higher than what it's ever been, we can now take a hard look at the pension, and we are actually conducting an experience study. And without getting into the details, the experience study basically takes a look at our actual experience and sees if the assumptions, the actuarial assumptions that we use to calculate that funding ratio align with what our actual experience is. So it's a good opportunity to do that. And then also take a hard look at our discount rate or our assumed rate of return, and just again trying to solidify that pension more.
Okay, any other questions? All right, Christy, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jason, I guess you're going to
Yes, sir. I can
cover the...
share a little bit of information here from our financial reports. Okay, if we could, we'll start on page 2 as we normally do, take a look at our transportation operations. And I'll share a few comments. Really, probably first thing to talk about would be the revenues. If you can see through 6 months of the fiscal year, so these financials are through December 31st. Our total revenues are just over $17 million. The significant variances you're going to see are with the miscellaneous revenue. You can see we're over our projection by about $172,000. And again, just as a reminder, that is primarily a CNG tax credit revenue that we received that we previously have not been eligible before. Our federal grant revenue, this is our normal formula funds. We are intentionally drawing a little bit less of those normal formula funds and instead drawing a little bit more of the CARES than what we had budgeted. And there's a couple things driving that overage in the CARES. It's one is, again, we're making up for some of our formula funds. And then second, we continue to see some overtime costs and primarily overtime costs on our personal services that are allowing us to draw more of that CARES reimbursement. On the expenditure side, our expenses are just over $15 million, 15.7, gives us revenues in excess of expenditures of 1.7 for the year. What I would like to point out here is on expenses, you can see some of the categories were right at budget. Personal services, or basically, you know, our wage costs, wages and benefits are really right at our budget at 101.9% of what we expected. So actually we're slightly over. You can see a couple of categories that we're under, but overall our total expenditure budget is 99.4% of what we had projected. So we have no room on our expenditure budget from here on out. And I know I've mentioned this before, but we do anticipate bringing a budget amendment to the trust to address our expenditure budget, because we know personal services in particular are going to continue to increase as we go through the year, just with the wage rates that we now are paying, and with the overtime driven primarily by the pandemic.
And I'm not thinking fuel's going down.
Yeah, fuel's another one that you can see we're over by about 5% of what we had projected, and you're right, Trustee Johnson, it will not be going down. So staff is already working on a budget amendment, and our goal at this point is to bring something to the trust for the March meeting to consider. Page 4 is parking operations, and talk a little bit about parking. We are making a comeback on our parking, to say the least, which is good. It's a good indicator of the amount of activity and such that's downtown, right? If we're generating parking revenue, that means people are coming downtown for work, for events. Starting with the revenues, you can see our revenues through 6 months of the fiscal year, just over $3 million. We're pretty close to target on our monthly contracts. Our event revenue and transient revenue are both over budget. Transient revenue in particular by almost $500,000. And then I did want to point out a negative variance on our tax-exempt parking. I think that's come up as a question a couple times, and I wanted to try to clarify that. Tax-exempt parking is primarily monthly contract parking that we charge to entities that we don't collect tax from directly. They pass that on. So obviously the City of Oklahoma City is one of our largest tax-exempt parking customers, but also the valet operations. And so when we were developing the budget, we simply anticipated primarily more monthly revenue from some of the hotels that have valet operations, and we just haven't seen all that come to fruition. So even though event revenue and transit revenue is up, some of that tax-exempt valet operating revenue is not. But nonetheless, it really puts us in a good position with revenues through 6 months of the fiscal year exceeding expenditures by almost $1.4 million. And then, not to dwell on the expenditures in detail, but you can see overall we're at about 80% of our expenditure budget. So that's certainly helping that bottom line. And I know the parking division has been working diligently all last year and even into this year to really manage those expenses, just because of the uncertainty, particularly at the beginning of the fiscal year. And then finally, I'll go to Streetcar Operations on page 7. And again, just direct your attention to total revenues of $2.6 million, exceeding total expenditures of $2.3 million. So that shows us revenues in excess of expenditures by about $253,000. However, I would direct your attention to the footnote in that we have $319,000 of basically just monthly contract expenses to Herzog that are outstanding, and then about $190,000 in, it says supplies, what that really primarily is streetcar parts. And so, you know, if you look at those two expenses that have incurred, about $500,000 of expenses that aren't reflected in this report, then obviously that changes the picture rather dramatically. In fact, we're upside down. Expenses exceed our revenues. So that's another one that we're looking at from the standpoint of a budget amendment, and we'll be bringing that to you in March. And again, primarily that's driven by spare parts.
Do we get any federal help on the parts side of it, reimbursement?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
For,
Oh, on federal?
uh-huh.
No, we don't use any of the federal grant funds for streetcar maintenance or parts. I mean, since our amount of those funds is limited, if we did, you know, it would probably just be taking it from somewhere else. So we've just managed that with the general fund. And that'll conclude my comments on the finances. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I mean, on the streetcar, I mean, the ridership's kind of picking back up some, isn't it, or?
Yeah, I believe in December was our second best month in terms of ridership. I believe it was right around 20 some odd thousand trips for the month.
Almost 25.
Yeah, it could be 25. I'm trying to get there in the report, but I remember it was 20,000 plus, considerably more than we did last year. Yeah, in fact, 24,709 trips in December compared to 14,835 the previous December. But again, to give you some context, December of 2019, pre-pandemic, when we were kind of on our month-over-month, you know, increase in ridership, we were at 46,000 trips. So really, if we're comparing back to pre-pandemic levels, we're a little, you know, over, you know, or about half of where we were.
All right. Any questions? Any other questions, trustees? All right. That concludes your comments. All right. Couple program reports, community engagement and customer relations, and I guess Lisa is going to give us a program report on that.
Good afternoon, Chairman, trustees. I'm Lisa Hubble. I'm the Administrative Services Manager. And today I have a presentation to kind of show you the recent activity in the Customer Service Division. So recently, I took over customer service back in September, and one of the first things that I did is interview the employees to kind of get their feedback. And a resounding theme that I heard is that they had some call volume that dropped off. So today we're going to talk about the impact that COVID had on our call volumes, as well as targeting service operating hours, and then it resulting in new call center hours. So we did an analysis of the data, and we compared pre-COVID call volume to the recent last 2 years. And so as you can see, the call volume has dropped about 43% since the pre-COVID times in fiscal year 2019. On the first graph there, we actually show the projection for fiscal year 22. So right now in our current fiscal year, we're still seeing like a 7% decrease from last year's call volume. So one of the common themes that I heard from the customer service reps was that they really didn't feel that that the call center needed to be open until 8 p.m. because the call volume dropped off. So we went back and looked at the data for 2019 because we wanted to make sure that it was in line with pre-COVID times because we didn't know what the future held. So as you can see, we did an analysis for fiscal year 2019, and the average call volume, it drops off drastically starting at 4:30 in the afternoon, and it continues to decrease till later in the evening. So the average just in 2020, the average call volume for 6:30 to 7, basically that half hour was 3 calls, then 2, then you can see it drops off 1. So there's a big decrease in their volume. So we continued to monitor this for this fiscal year and continued to see the trend go down. So last month, we actually changed the call center hours to align more with the transit center. So the call center is open from 7:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. It is open on Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the transit center hours are 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. The transit center is closed on Saturdays, though, so there's a little bit of a difference. We still see that there's not a significant amount of calls on Saturday, but there's still enough calls to warrant manning the call center during that time. So in relation to community outreach, Kristen basically arranged the Martin Luther King Parade and Embark's participation in it. There you can see Trustee Cooper in the front of it, and then they have another shot of the parade route from the bus. And I believe, Jason, didn't you participate in the parade?
Yes, yeah. Kristen and I joined Trustee Cooper and our bus operator, I believe that was Laura, and she did a great job.
Yeah, there was a good turnout. So in the future, Kristen will be here to report on community engagement. Her duties have kind of increased in relation to the BRT and her outreach to the community. So she'll be focusing on those things as well as community outreach in general. All right, is there any questions? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Transit system report, Jesse?
Good afternoon.
Hello.
A little different saying afternoon, not morning. First, I want to apologize for coming in a few minutes late. I was actually back in the back room. OKC Streetcar is part of the Community Streetcar Coalition, and we were giving a quick update to that coalition about where OKC Streetcar was. Speaking of the OKC or the Community Streetcar Coalition, in 2 years, we're bringing the whole group to Oklahoma City, where we're going to get to show off Oklahoma City and all the improvements that we made in Oklahoma City. I did want to give a quick update before we jumped into the presentation. I'm sure everybody was aware that we had a pretty good little snowstorm last week, and wanted to give the board an update of kind of some of the things that we did during that snowstorm to make sure that we provided that our transit services to the customers of Oklahoma City. So, we made sure that the transit center was clear of all snow and ice so that people could easily get between our buses for those transfers. We worked closely with Public Works to make sure that any trouble areas were salted or plowed so we could still maintain our services with our buses. And we also worked closely with HCSI with OKC Streetcar, and thanks to the board for allowing us to purchase some of the equipment that we used. So we were able to plow the tracks, and then right behind the plow, we were able to sweep the tracks. And then we had a lot of de-icer out there to make sure that our track switches were throwing like they needed to. Quick little story about our tracks. So I don't know if anybody knows Caleb with Clarity Coffee. So he actually stopped Carly. Carly went into Clarity Coffee and was getting some coffee to get refreshed. And he told Carly that he was actually able to ride his bike to work. And he rode between the tracks because they were perfectly clear, because we were able to keep the tracks 100% clear. So not only was he was able to bike to work in the snow and ice, thanks to Carly and his crew. So we'll jump into basically the transit report. We'll give a quick update on the BRT, and then we'll jump into the transit. So where we currently are right now, so we actually moved this just slightly since last Friday. So last Friday we actually received our 100% design drawings, and we anticipate bringing that 100% design set to our March board to be released to go out to bid with your review and approval. So what we've done leading up to that was our utility conferences, right? So we've met with all the different utilities, public and private, to see if there were any utilities that needed to be relocated. Really, OG&E is the only one out there that has any utilities that need to be relocated, so we've been working closely with them to get all that coordination to happen, and then also working with Oklahoma City Utility Department to any water or sewer lines that need to be relocated. So we actually sent our drawings out for peer review also. So we reached out to Kansas City with their BRT, and also with El Paso with their BRT. We received some review comments that we were able to pass on to our engineer to make sure that any lessons learned or anything like that were able to be incorporated into our drawing set. So March, we 100% design coming to the board, and then moving on. So once sorry about the animation there. You just got to do a couple clicks. Yep. So we anticipate construction start date of June of 2022. And again, I mentioned this several times, about a year-long process for that construction, wrapping up construction completion around July of 2023, and then between July and October, when we go into revenue service, we'll do our construction and compliance testing, just like we did with the streetcar, making sure that our buses meet our criteria, along with our alignment, the construction of the BRT stops, things like that. All right, moving on to the next item. So our buses, right? So this is our current schedule with our BRT, our buses going into production. So February 7th, so just, what is today, the 9th? So 2 days ago, our very first bus entered line entry. So what that means is it started production, right? So you can see our schedule here. So throughout the whole month of February, all of our buses will go into line entry, so starting production. And then around the first week of April is when we anticipate our very first bus arriving in Oklahoma City. Now, of course, all of this is dependent on supply chain, right? So New Flyer is currently telling us that there are no supply chain issues, but a lot can change between February and April, so we'll keep a close eye on that and obviously keep the board updated with any changes. So this slide here, you'll start seeing this every month. This is anybody that's familiar with how we did OKC Streetcar when we started bringing those online. I'll provide those updates here and show the progress, and we'll also include some pictures of the buses going through the production line. All right, transit system report. Yep,
So it only takes 2 months to build those buses?
they're very fast, yeah.
That is fast.
Yeah.
So I do have a question about the construction on the BRT.
Yep.
So is that a specialized kind of construction that will be looking for a wider geographic range of contractors, or is that something we think local contractors can participate in?
Yeah, it's really not specialized. It's more or less concrete work and roadway work. So we anticipate local contractors being able to bid on it pretty easily. You know, of course, following public works procedures for pre-qualified and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And will that be something that, how long will you be out for bids on it?
Yeah, so the plan is to bring it to the board in March. Then it would need to be concurred with Aquit and then go into City Council shortly after that. And then as soon as it's approved by City Council, it will go out to bid. So it's about, I believe it's 3 to 4 weeks bid cycle, which is pretty standard. And then, you know, obviously there's the Q&A process, and there may be some addendums that go out to answer some of those
So
Q&A.
there'll be a pre-bid meeting?
I'm sorry?
There'll be a pre-bid meeting?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll follow the public works procedure to the T. So there'll be the pre-bid meeting, and yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
Jesse, if we get those buses in April, what are we going to do with them until the BRT opens up?
It's a great question. So we've worked out an agreement with New Flyer. They've got some procedures in place, and so we're actually going to be storing them at our facility at 2000 South May, but we'll follow the procedures to make sure that they stay. Basically, our agreement with New Flyer is that they won't actually enter the warranty process until they go into revenue service. So what that means is we're going to follow New Flyer's procedures, just like if they were stored at New Flyer, where we have to cycle the gearboxes and check the oil and things like that. So what's interesting is, you know, our very first preventative maintenance procedure will actually happen before they ever go into revenue operations, just based on that timeline. And so our maintenance department will be able to provide that, or perform preventative maintenance to meet those requirements with New Flyer.
Will some of them go into service with any of our other routes, maybe the Norman to Oklahoma City route, or?
No.
So we're not
That's
going to?
No, that's not our plan. Is we want to keep those buses, particularly since they're branded Rapid, keep those for the BRT. Probably their first use will be when we begin training in them.
Yep. Yeah, so part of our process, obviously, is we're going to have to train our operators, because these are different boarding for, you know, with the level boarding and things like that, so you have to get extremely close to the raised platform. So there's going to be a training procedure that happens before we ever go into revenue service. And then also one of the things that we're going to do is we're actually going to simulate service at a minimum 30 days prior to us going into that actual revenue service. So you'll actually see these BRT buses running up and down Northwest Expressway in class and empty. I mean, obviously we'll have the header panels.
Those dang buses, they're running empty all the time.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
it'll be just like we did with the streetcar. We'll actually run the buses 30 days prior to going into revenue service, just to make sure that there's no safety issues that, that we need to mitigate prior to going into service. Yep. Okay. All right, transit system report. So not that it's a competition, but we are seeing improvements with ridership also. So Corey isn't the only one that gets to say that they're seeing some improvements across the board. So we've actually seen a 28% increase with our ridership with fixed route compared to December of 2020. Obviously, if you go back to pre-pandemic, we still got some room to grow, but we are starting to see that ridership come back in Oklahoma City with the 28% increase here with our fixed route. And this is, our average weekday ridership. And so if we move on to the next slide there, this is our average weeknight service, right? So again, starting to see increases there. We're going from nearly 200 riders to 269 riders. So again, 34% increase there with our night ridership. And then moving on to our weekend ridership. Sorry, moving on to Embark Plus. So again, we're starting to see increases there compared to 2020. Seeing about a 12% increase with our Embark Plus.
Hey, Jesse,
Yep.
can we pause right there? Mr. Chairman, would you like to officially call the meeting to order?
I will call the February meeting. Okay, February meeting to order. We're doing it on a Wednesday afternoon, I think, instead of last Friday morning because of the weather. So,
And then
trustee,
Mr.
we moved some of the reports to the end till we had a quorum. So, so let's just continue with
Sure.
this, and then we'll go back to the beginning of
Okay.
our agenda.
Okay, thank you. Yep. And then our mobility management. So this shows that there's a slight decrease, but what I wanted to make sure that we pointed out is that it's a little bit harder to show our average daily ridership when it comes to our mobility management department. There's a lot of programs that maybe have 1 or 2 rides that are done per month, right? So like some of the shuttle services, things like that. So while there shows to be a slight decrease, we're actually starting to see an increase in our mobility management also, whenever you actually take into consideration each ride instead of just averages, right? So we're, again, starting to see increases across the board compared to 2020. And as we move on to OKC Streetcar, so you mentioned this earlier, so we're seeing pretty significant increase there, so it's nearly a 67% increase in our ridership month over month compared to 2020, with nearly 25,000 riders in December of last year.
What do you attribute that? I mean, people coming to work downtown, more events that maybe
Yeah, so specifically with streetcar, a lot of our ridership happens on the weekends, and so as events are starting to come back to Oklahoma City, really the driving factor of seeing our ridership increase is seeing people out on the street, like people walking around, right? So you had Downtown December happening in December, and with the complimentary passes on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to align with the Downtown December, we saw a large increase with our ridership in December based on people being downtown for those events and things like that.
have we got a,
We had pretty good weather in December too.
We did, yeah, we had significant, we had great weather in December, you're absolutely right.
do we have a plan for when conventions or meetings come to the new convention center to advertise our streetcars? And
We do, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're working very, very close with the convention. I mean, we see that as a huge opportunity,
Yeah.
right? If we've got 5,000 people that are across the street, we want to make sure they're using the streetcar. So we're, Kristen and the OKC Streetcar team are working very closely with the Convention Bureau.
Good.
Yep. Okay. And then I wanted to bring Norman, right? So we got Norman fixed right here. So we seeing a 27% increase in Norman also. So again, just across the board, we're starting to see transit ridership increase in Oklahoma and in Norman. And then the final slide here is Norman fixed route. Should have had this more memorized, right? So our Norman fixed route, Saturday ridership also starting to see an increase year over year. And then Embark Plus and Norman, again, increases, right? So just continue to increase, nearly a 30% increase in ridership with our Embark Plus in Norman. This was the final slide. So just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that on Friday, February 11th, we're having our big ribbon cutting in Norman with the new facility down in Norman. Obviously this is a City of Norman facility, but this is where we operate Embark Norman out of. We just recently, 2 weeks ago, we moved from where we've been operating Embark Norman to the new facility, and we want to make sure that the board had an opportunity to attend if they'd like. And then
That is a Norman facility. They built it,
yeah, so we're sharing it with the fire department, where they do fleet services for the fire department, but they also do the fleet services on the buses that we operate in Norman. And then I'd be remiss to mention, I talked about the snow and ice things that we did. I also wanted to make sure I did give a shout out to Corey and his group with the parking structures, right? So with the parking structures, it's essentially like a bridge, right? So you got air going over the top and air going over the bottom. So Corey and his team really had to do a tremendous job to make sure that those parking structures were safe for people to not only drive up but also walk around. And then Mark and his team with the riverboat cruises, obviously boats sitting in water. When we get temperatures like that, we got to make sure that we protect those assets. So Mark and his team, they had agitators in the water to make sure that water didn't freeze, and then also had heaters going inside the boats to make sure we were protecting those assets. So just really a team effort across the board anytime a weather event like that happens in Oklahoma City, and making sure we not only provide service but protect our assets that we have also. I believe that concludes the presentation. Happy to take any questions.
any other questions? No?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. At some point, I think it's going to be important for us as a trust to start comparing back to a more normal year. I feel like we're in the position of we're telling a great story about increases, but it's increases from a pretty dark day. And I'd just like for us to, as a board, kind of have a little bit more context back to 2019 when things were more normal. And so I'm wondering if we can start seeing that in our graphics.
Yeah, we can easily make that change, and I agree. That's when we were talking about Streetcar earlier, to your point, that's why I shared the 2019 numbers, because that really is, I think, our baseline for comparison. So we have all the data. I think as long as the graphs aren't too busy for the trustees, we can show 3 years.
Okay.
I'd be happy to. I mean, that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
We
I
gotta.
mean, even that third year look back is still a year that's split with
True.
half the year was non-COVID and half the year, well, a third of the year was COVID.
Yeah, the end of the year.
So, but I just think that if we continue to have that expectation that we're comparing to fiscal year 21, we're not going to have a reasonable expectation of how things should look when we're back to a more normal service level.
And maybe you don't even compare it to that fiscal year,
I don't know.
you know?
Yeah, it was really unfortunate because when you took a look at 2019 and 2020 with the streetcar, I mean, 2020 you were really starting to see it ramp up compared to 2019, and then COVID hit.
Right.
So I was really excited to see what I was going to do, but we didn't get a chance to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I'd be happy to start sharing those numbers, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make it so that it seems like, oh, we're not doing a good job, but I just do think that perspective is going to be important to us.
Yep.
Well, thank you, Laura. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will call to order our meeting, as I said. We had one item from the chairman, and that was a resolution for Kay Bickham. She was not able to be here today, so she will be here at our next monthly meeting, and we'll do the presentation and appreciation for Kay and her service to the trust next month. Do we have any citizens to be heard? If not, I would have a motion to review our minutes of January 7th, if there's any changes, deletions, or additions by any of the trustees. If not, I'd have a motion to approve those minutes.
If you need to sit.
Okay, what am I doing wrong? You're on presentation stuff. Oh. No, I wasn't.
You don't get to vote.
No voting buttons. No voting buttons for you, Laura Johnson.
That's right, boy.
Yeah. Voice vote, yes, I approve, I vote to approve the
All
minutes.
right, and the minute, and they were passed by the vote other than her voice vote, so that motion carries. Now, for the first time in history, I do not think I've ever had a meeting where we didn't have a consent docket.
Chairman, before we jump over to the individual for consideration, could we have a motion to defer the resolution for K?
I would move to defer the resolution for K.
I second.
Thank you.
I thought I just did it myself, but that's okay.
Yes. And then just a voice vote for everyone, and
Okay,
we can move forward. Sorry to interrupt.
do we have a second? I didn't hear it. Okay. We'll have a voice vote. Aye. Aye?
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, now we'll get into the main agenda of our meeting, and that is our items for individual consideration. Item A is an amendment with the Omni Hotel for a parking agreement to provide limited number of temporary discounted parking rates for, I guess, their employees.
Yes, the item for the trust to consider today is, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, an amendment to our current agreement with Omni. Our current agreement really allows for parking spaces dedicated to the Omni, primarily for their customers.
Oh, okay.
Those that are, staying at the hotel or having their cars valeted. We do not have any provisions right now to allow for employee parking. The Omni has approached us about securing some of those spaces for employee parking, and currently, we have the luxury to do that in that, we have not seen, a lot of demand from the convention center yet, but we do know that demand is coming. So really what we're trying to do is, at least in my opinion, it's kind of it's a win-win in that we're able to temporarily provide some parking for the Omni employees, generate additional revenue for the trust. We're estimating approximately $150,000 annually. And then if demand begins to exceed capacity, and we're looking forward to the day when we have a lot of convention parkers in that garage, then the agreement allows us to basically suspend or revoke the employee parking in that convention center garage. So with approval of the item, we'll begin allowing or reserving those spaces. Shouldn't say reserve. We'll have some dedicated spaces in the garage for Omni employee parking. They'll be able to subscribe to that on a monthly basis, or because some of the work is part-time and various shifts, if they simply want a discounted daily validation rate, we'll do that as well.
All right. Any questions? Then I'd have a motion to approve item A. I think motion carries, I guess. All right, thank you. Item B is amendment number 2 to the customer individual rules of conduct policy and procedures.
So if there's one item we could have put on the consent docket, it might have been this one, but since the trust just approved the customer code of conduct in November, just recently, we thought it was probably worth explanation as to why we're bringing it back again. And it's really just a very simple change. As the memo describes, we're simply requiring customers that board our buses with blankets or, a large garment that they use to keep warm while waiting for the bus, that blanket, for example, is secured. That way it's not taking up space in a seat next to them or in the aisle or something to that effect. So pretty minor change, but again, wanted to bring it back to the board since it is our official code of conduct policy and procedures.
Okay. And I guess we supply those bags if they don't have one, they'll.
Yes, sir, we do.
Yeah, okay. All right. Have a motion? It's been moved and seconded. And all in favor, voted, motion passes. Item C, amendment number 2 to professional services agreement with Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates to amend the scope of services included scheduling report.
Yes, so as the item states, this is amendment number 2 to our agreement with Nelson Nygaard. As we know, we have Nelson Nygaard under contract for our comprehensive operational analysis. And what we would like to accomplish with this amendment is expanding Nelson Nygaard's scope a little bit to really help our staff look at really the scheduling of our work. So whereas Nelson Nygaard is helping us develop schedules and route timing, like on the customer-facing side of our service, once those routes and those times are established, then we have to really break that service into, we refer to within the department, basically pieces of work, right, that employees can sign on, whether it be 8-hour shifts that they work or 10-hour shifts. And what we haven't really had an opportunity to do in the past is really bring in a level of expertise outside of our department to look at how we're breaking that work up. And so with Nelson Nygaard helping us do that, what we're really hoping to accomplish is having industry experts come in, give our process a fresh look, and ideally, or optimistically, we can gain some efficiencies. And with those efficiencies, that could lead to the potential for, maybe being able to cover the same amount of work with maybe less staff, not significant. But ideally, we'll be able to create some efficiencies where we might be able to build in larger or breaks for the work that the bus operators perform. And I just want to be real cautious. When I say less staff, it's not certainly that we would not need as many bus operators. It just simply would allow us to either put more service on the street with existing staff or change some of the schedules up so that perhaps there's more variety of work to sign on to.
And maybe even an opportunity to improve our on-time performance.
Yes, that should also factor in.
All right, any other questions? Then do I have a motion to approve item C? And a second? All in favor? Motion passes, thank you. Item D is an amendment number 2 to restatement of agreement with Tyler Outdoor Advertising.
Yeah, so with this item, as the trust knows, COTPA and Tyler Outdoor Advertising have had a long-standing relationship when it comes to street furniture, AKA bus benches and bus shelters. The advertising that is placed on, the street furniture obviously is split between, the advertising revenue, I should say, is split between Tyler, who basically sells the advertising, maintains the transit stops for us. So split with Tyler and COTPA. And what we were looking at doing is basically we've renegotiated that agreement to change the revenue split so that rather than the revenue split being dependent on who owns the shelters in particular, because of the additional shelters, 500 plus, that will be coming with MAPS 4, there's going to be a lot more maintenance throughout the system that's going to be required that Tyler has agreed to do. So we've renegotiated the revenue split so that, again, rather than it being focused on who owns what just across the board in years 1 through 5, COTPA's share would be, COTPA's share would be 15% of the revenue, and then we have a graduated scale going up to 25%. Let me check that.
And
So
most of that revenue is advertising, isn't it? Or
Yeah, so it's advertising revenue, and the agreement has Kotpa and Tyler splitting the net revenue after expenses.
What was the percentage on the previous agreement? I guess it was different based on who owned the shelter?
Yeah, so the agreement that we previously had was 55% of the net revenue would go to Kotpa on Kotpa-owned shelters, and 10% of the revenue would go to Kotpa for Tyler-owned furniture, keeping in mind that all the benches essentially are owned by Tyler, and then some of the, roughly half and half or so, but Kotpa bought some shelters and Tyler bought some shelters. So we just kept track of the different street furniture and allocated the revenue split accordingly. And so again, with this agreement, Kotpa's base would go to 15% just across the board. We do still have a what we call a minimum annual guarantee, so of $6,000 a month. So, regardless, if no advertising whatsoever was sold with the agreement, Kotpa would still see, the $6,000 a month. But we generally always exceed that and would anticipate exceeding that significantly with, over the course of the years, 500 more shelters in the system. Although not all so the shelters have 2 ad faces versus 1 on the bench. And although not all the shelters have marketable double ad faces, a lot of them do, so there should be more revenue for both Tyler and Kotpa as we move forward.
We currently own, so all those 500 new, we own those shelters, correct?
Technically, the city, because it's being purchased
but
with MAPS 4 funds,
that's what I
the
mean,
city,
right?
the
Yeah.
city would own those.
Okay. So in the previous arrangement, we would be making 55% of that advertising dollars.
We
Right.
would. The unfortunate, just with the anticipated demands that we're going to be asking of Tyler to maintain, we would either need to renegotiate this agreement to allow more resources to be put towards maintenance, or we would have to be spending some of that revenue on maintenance services, because we're going to have amount of shelters like we've never had before.
And were we maintaining our previously owned, or was Tyler maintaining those?
Tyler has always maintained those. That not only do they maintain them, but they construct them as well. So, of the 300 or so, almost 300 shelters we put up, or I'm sorry, we have 280 or close to 300 shelters in the system now. So we've literally constructed hundreds of shelters. Tyler does. They put the pieces together. And then also, anytime there's a call for repairs or maintenance, they're the ones that do that. Now, we are taking over the trash duties. So we're removing the trash, emptying the trash cans at the shelters, but all the maintenance, Tyler has still agreed to do.
So do we pay them for the assembly of those? That's just included in the contract?
Right. Yep,
Okay.
their response, they do the assembly and then all the maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is this very time sensitive? Could we take another look at this?
Sure, at the discretion of the trust, we absolutely can.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I'd say it's pretty expensive on their part to maintain them all and assemble them and put them up and do all that. That's not something I think we want to take on particularly.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we got a couple of options. We could move to defer it. We did have this retroactive to January. There's nothing that I guess would prevent us from renegotiating as well if you wanted us to take a look at it after this first year. But obviously, it's at the discretion of the trust. We're happy to do.
I'd
Staff's
be
happy to
interested.
do whatever.
It's going to be hard to compare the impact of the change since there's so many new shelters.
Right. Yeah.
So that's why, you know, and this is for 1 year, correct?
No, the agreement's a
Or for six-
multi,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a
6 to 10
multi-year
years.
agreement.
Oh,
yeah.
32, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know why I read that as 23. I think this would be worth a second look just because of the length of it and on the moving pieces. Just to make sure.
Sure.
Because it's a significant decrease in our percentage for our own, for the bus shelters that we own. And I understand there's a lot of moving parts, but I would feel more comfortable
Sure.
just taking another look at it.
Yeah, and we've done, you know, we didn't obviously have all the details in the memo, but we did a analysis of the revenue. And to your point, you know, normally we would come and say, well, we have X number of shelters, and this is our current split, and this is what we're earning. Now we're changing it. But with all the influx of all the additional shelters, it's hard to put a number on that. We just
Exactly.
know it's going to be more for probably both parties.
Right.
But yeah, we're happy to go over our revenue projections, whatever we need to do.
Thank you so much.
Sweet.
Is that a motion to defer it to next month?
I'd like to move to defer this item to next month.
I'll second.
Oops. So should we be voting on this one then, or to defer? Okay.
All right, that's deferred till next month.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Our last is an assignment agreement between COPTA and the City of Oklahoma City for the option agreement on the land directly south of the Embark headquarters and transit.
Yeah, just a real quick comment on this one. As you'll recall, the trust in a previous month exercised the second year of the option agreement we had with SMJ, we meaning the trust, of course, to hold the approximately 11 acres south of our South May facility, understanding that that would be a MAPS 4 project, the purchase of that land. So I'm pleased to report that with the help of the MAPS office, that project to purchase the land is moving along quickly. And in order to make the purchase, COTPA needs to assign the rights to that options agreement to the city, since city funds will be used to purchase that land. So there's really no additional cost to this item. It's simply assigning those rights.
Didn't I read somewhere they're waiting on an appraisal or?
Yeah, we have appraisal and environmental work both that we're doing. And last I heard, MAPS had ordered an appraisal. I'm not sure the exact status of it.
Okay, all right. All right, any no questions? I have a motion to approve item E. All right, motion passes. Thank you. I guess the other item that we have gotten to is the ratification of claims and payroll for January 4th through January 25th. If there are no questions concerning those, then I'd have a motion to ratify. Motion passes. All right. Any other items from any of the trustees?
We need to move to receive our reports.
Yeah, and
Oh.
our financials and.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, we do need a motion to receive our financial reports. All right, motion passes. And then to receive our program reports. All right, motion passes. Thank you. Now, any other items from any of the trustees? Well, I wish everybody a happy Wednesday afternoon compared to most of our meetings. And I guess our meeting's adjourned.
Awesome.